Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I'm like to say that I'm going to be splitting my time with my colleague from Chatham-Kent Leamington today. Madam Speaker, I'm pleased to rise today to speak on this budget. For months in this House, we have heard from the Liberals, one after another, tell us that we are going to be presented with a generational, if not transformative, budget for this year, 2025. We, of course, were waiting with bated breath to listen to this budget, which is not fooling anybody. It's not a budget. A budget is done before you spend the money, Madam Speaker. This budget is the most expensive in Canadian history outside of the pandemic. The fiscal year, as Canadians know, for the Government of Canada begins April 1. This budget calls for $586 billion in spending, the most expensive, as I say, in Canadian history outside of the pandemic. And, but here's the thing, Madam Speaker. 7 months have already transpired. 7 months of what's in this budget has already been spent. $343 billion, just a simple division, 7 of the 12 months. $343 billion, I say to my Liberal friends, they've already spent. So now they've brought this 406-page omnibus budget bill into Parliament saying, hey, here's what we're going to do, vote with us. They don't care about what our vote's going to be, Madam Speaker. They have no respect for Parliament or the process of this place. They don't care for the House of Democracy. They don't care to listen to debate. Because if they did, they would have presented this budget when they were elected, not wait 7 months. Take the summer off, go on vacation, perhaps do a little bit of golfing, travel to Europe, come back, not even presented in September, not in October, but on November the 4th, they said, here's a budget, we've already spent 7 months of it. If you guys don't vote for it, oops, you may want an election. Well, I have news for them, Madam Speaker. Canadians aren't buying it. No matter how many times the finance minister stands up in this House and says he has good news for Canadians, Canadians know that with this government, it's nothing but bad news, Madam Speaker. We know that for sure. This year, this budget is calling for $80 billion deficit. That's spending $80 billion more than you take in. Every Canadian family and every Canadian business knows that if you spend more than you take in, it's a formula for bankruptcy. It never bodes well. But it gets worse, Madam Speaker. It gets a lot worse. Over the next 5 years, $324 billion added to our national debt. A staggering $324 billion on top of the roughly $1.4 trillion Canada always still is in debt for today. Now, here's the problem with that. When you borrow money, you have to pay interest on that money. And this year, lo and behold, this Liberal government opposite, with a so-called economist brainiac prime minister, is offering Canadians, Madam Speaker, is offering Canadians a staggering debt of over almost $60 billion in interest payments. More than we spend in health care in this country. Canadians today walking into an emergency department of a section of a hospital, they have to wait, Madam Speaker. They have to wait hours and hours and hours to get service. And when they get that service, quite often they're in the hallway of the hospital for days waiting for service. But this government has nothing in this budget that increases any previous commitment on health care. But there's a lot in this budget that will increase the cost of interest the Canadians will pay because, Madam Speaker, let's just say this. Everybody in this House, as all Canadians know, the government has no other source of income other than the Canadian taxpayer. Right. So who's going to pay for all of this? It's the hard-working Canadians that are going to pay for this bill that they keep adding and adding and adding to. It's a staggering number, $60 billion in interest alone. Now, Madam Speaker, Canadians are struggling to make ends meet. They walk in the grocery store, the prices keep going up. I've met seniors, I've met young people who are saying, hey, we have to eat less. I think I've said the story in this House of a lady in my riding when I knocked on her door during the election, said, "Sir, I'm not into politics, but I have to eat less because I want to keep living in my home and I'm on a fixed income because the prices are so high." So I was looking in this budget for some kind of relief for our seniors. But what do I find? I find the following words. I find the word industrial carbon tax.
Shameful.
The industrial carbon tax, Madam Speaker, adds costs to farmers for their equipment, for their manufacturing processes, to trucking companies, adds cost to the freight. What do these liberals think happens when they keep adding these costs? They'll stand up and they'll say, "Oh, it's an imaginary, there's no such thing as higher, we're not taxing food." Well, what do they think happens when they go to the manufacturers, the producers, and they go to the truckers that deliver the food to the grocery stores that people consume? What do they think happens when they increase the costs by imposing this industrial carbon tax, which in this budget is programmed to increase, Madam Speaker? Here's what happens. It's very simple. They will add that cost to the cost of their product, which eventually ends up on the price of that food item when you walk into the grocery store to purchase. So, in effect, what they're doing is they're raising food costs at a time when people are struggling to make ends meet. Speaking of struggling to make ends meet, Madam Speaker, you may have heard us say in this House repeatedly that food banks have told us a record number of 2.2 million Canadians are now visiting the food bank on a daily basis, 1/3 of which, we're told, are children. That's over 700,000 children a month. In fact, Madam Speaker, to put things into perspective, today, while these liberals are here asking for a free credit card, a free line of credit on money which they've already spent 7/12 of, 24,000 hungry children will walk into a food bank hoping to find an item that they can consume because they're hungry. Shame on these liberals, shame on the government for not considering the impact of their actions with this budget to continue to increase by imposing things like the carbon tax and the standard fuel tax on the manufacturers and the people that deliver it, so that our children who can't eat, it's even harder for their families to buy that food to put on the table, and they're not going to school hungry. Okay? That is shameless. And I can tell you that they feel is shameful, and they feel no shame for that at all. In fact, Madam Speaker, I've heard liberals after liberal get up in this House and tout this budget as being generational. We all know the only thing it's doing, it's indebting. And they're right, it's generational in the sense that it's adding generational debt to our children moving forward. Now, speaking of children, let's talk about youth. Youth unemployment. Youth unemployment, Madam Speaker, I see I have 2 minutes left. Youth unemployment is hovering around 20% in the Greater Toronto Area. And why is it hovering there? Well, in large part because of the action of this Liberal government over the last 10 years. I've heard people stand on the other side and talk about Stephen Harper. Well, guess what, Madam Speaker? Mr. Harper, who was an outstanding Prime Minister, hasn't been here for 10 years. You notice they conveniently forget the 10 years that they stood up in this House and spoke vociferously in support of Prime Minister Trudeau and all of that additional debt that he put onto this country and the mess that he created in pretty much every file, including, of course, immigration. And speaking of immigration, Madam Speaker, we have international students, we have temporary foreign workers, all of which are taking jobs that our youth can take today. So in closing, Madam Speaker, I assume I have about a minute left? I have about a minute left. Let me just say this in the minute that I have left. If they continue down this path of bringing in folks into this country that take the jobs away from our children, of imposing costs on Canadians that don't need to be there, and stand up and maneuver back and forth. And the worst thing of all, Madam Speaker, is they are the only party in this House that has uttered the word election. God forbid that we don't want to put $324 billion of additional debt on our children. It's because we want an election, they say. They're out of touch with Canadians. They don't know what people are dealing with. And I would argue, Madam Speaker, vociferously myself, that a government has a responsibility to produce a document and spend the finances of this country in a way that benefits the Canadian people, Canadian families, and Canadian businesses. Thank you very much.
Questions and comments, the honourable member
For Montbrino Acadie. Madam Speaker, I'm stunned to hear my colleague remind us how much they're speaking about Mr. Trudeau in his absence as if they miss him in the House. We have a new government of Canada with a new budget putting forward the economic efforts to grow Canada's economy. It's about investing in the army. We are a G7 country, and we need to have a strong army and defense. This will create a huge number of jobs in the country. What does he think about our investments in the Canadian Army? Thank you.
Member for Aurora Oak Ridges, Richmond Hill.
Madam Speaker, I thank the member for the question, and he's sad that I mentioned the name Trudeau, whether he likes it or not. He's part of the party, and he thinks this is a new government. Well, it doesn't take a genius to look at the front bench and see the musical chairs they played with ministers being in different positions, Madam Speaker. It's obvious. The Minister of Finance today was a former Minister of Industry, the Minister of, I mean, you just look back and forth. What they've done is they played musical chairs with the front bench. Shame on them. We're talking about producing something, a document, a budget, that will address the needs of Canadians. Playing politics on that is shameful on behalf of this party and the Liberal government, Madam Speaker.
Questions et commentaires, l'honorable député.
The Honourable Member for Rivière-du-Nord. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I'd like to thank my colleague for the speech. It was very interesting. Now, the budget is an important step, and there were a lot of things missing from the budget. Health investments, transfers to provinces in different areas, the housing crisis. So those are things that have been dealt with, but there are other things that have not been dealt with, such as justice. This particularly concerns me, Madam Speaker. This is something that I study in Parliament, and I've noticed that there are major problems with justice. I saw nothing about it in the budget. Will there be a new system for appointing judges, setting up prevention programs, assistance for victims, all sorts of things like that? There are all kinds of legal problems that are not being addressed in this budget. So I'd like to hear my colleague talk about that question.
Member for Aurora Oak Ridges, Richmond Hill.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I'd like to thank my friend, the honourable colleague, for his question. He's right. There's precious little in this budget that deals with dealing with the actual problem we have with housing, the actual problem we have with healthcare, the actual problem we have with employment. And on to the justice issue, Madam Speaker. I live in a community where in the last 60 days we've had 2 murders on the streets of Richmond Hill, quiet streets in Richmond Hill. I was also looking in the budget to see if we can get some kind of relief, some kind of focus, some kind of attention on how our justice system runs in this country. But unfortunately, it's not in here. This is a document full of rhetoric that does not respond to, in fact, Madam Speaker, just on the issue of immigration alone, which is a big problem in this country, page 311 scantily addresses the issue, but the top line is they're going to have to reduce the resources in immigration because they're going to be imposing 15% tax cut on the department. This is ridiculous, Madam Speaker. The government has missed the boat and continues to miss the boat on what really is affecting Canadians today.
The honourable member for Portage Lucid.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you to my honourable colleague for a very impassioned and appropriate speech. He worked in business. I'd like to get his understanding of if a business were to run in the way that would be adding $10 million in debt every hour like this government is set to with this inflationary budget, how long would you be able to stay in business?
The order, the honourable member for Aurora Oak Ridges, Richmond Hill.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Look, it's a formula for bankruptcy. That's what this is. But this government doesn't seem to care. Just pass on the debt to our children, to future generations, to our seniors that can't afford to eat, to children who are walking into food banks hungry. You know, they're very good at heckling, Madam Speaker, but the bottom line is this, okay? Canadian families are suffering. 24,000 children are walking into a food bank hungry today. This is a good question. A business will go bankrupt if they spend more than they earn. That's Business 101. That's a lesson the Liberal Party, the Liberal government has never learned, and they have shown no indication that they have the capacity to learn it. Thank you.